Good morning, everyone. We welcome you to our Sunday morning roundtable discussion. Thank you all for joining. It's February 23rd, 2020. We are recording from the Plainfield Christian Science Church, Plainfield, New Jersey, the United States of America. And we will start today with our morning prayer.
Good morning. This is Mrs. Eddy's prayer given at the Massachusetts Metaphysical College. This prayer can be found on page 171 of the Green Book, otherwise known as Mary Baker Eddy's 6 Days of Revelation, compiled by Richard Oakes. O my God, I offer as a consecrated gift upon thine altar a heart dedicated to thy service, lips speaking only words of charity, love, and truth, thoughts striving to be only the true thoughts of the mind of God. Help me to endure unto the end, strong in the faith, powerful in the truth, all the influence that I can bring to bear, all the force of tongue or pen that is mine, I offer in thy service. May heaven help, consecrate, and accept.
Thank you. This is our watching point for the week. It's from a book by Gilbert Carpenter called 500 Watching Points. I don't know if you've followed us on the website or anything. Or you?
No.
No?
All right. Watch number 13. Watch lest you believe that the action of truth is improving your human mind to the point where it will eventually become true wisdom. The real mind, which contains all wisdom, is divine. Mind cannot be improved, it must be reflected by man. The only improvement one can make is to enlarge his ability to reflect divine mind. Christian Science does not come to do man's thinking for him, neither does it have as its goal the improvement of human thinking. Its mission is to teach what right thinking is, and how one may reflect this right thinking from God, the one mind, the source of all right ideas. Mrs. Eddy once wrote, quote, "Remember that the so-called human mind is expected to increase in wisdom until it disappears, and divine mind is seen to be the only mind." Then at another time, "The human mind does not increase in wisdom. Wisdom decreases the human mind." End quote. The great danger in an improvement of the human mind is lest mortal man come to have more faith in it instead of less. End quote.
Thank you. Comments on that?
I like wisdom decreases the human mind. Means a lot. I mean, what is the human mind? I've seen that everything that I did, thinking it through myself really didn't come to too much. So it's always turning to God, seeking his direction, everything turning to him. This is what made the difference.
Yes. Anybody else?
Yeah, that when Paul writes about the carnal mind, which is the human mind, he takes away any sort of acknowledgement of it and says that spiritual things sound foolish to him. And so it's kind of this watching point is making it clear that like intellectualism and spiritual sense are two distinct things. And the goal should be to develop your spiritual sense, not to become academically intelligent with the Bible or with science and health or with anything having to do with Christian Science.
Thank you very much. Absolutely right. People think they can develop their human mind, and it's actually impossible. There's only the one wisdom, the one mind, and it is from God. And the only way you get that is by getting yourself out of the way and letting God use you. In the lesson, 6 in the Bible. And the Jews marvel, saying, "How knowing this man letters, having never learned?" And Jesus answered them and said, "My doctrine is not mine, but his that sent me." He got all his ability, all his capability, everything from the Father. He knew he wasn't God, because this is sometimes a misconception with some people. It seems impossible, where they think, well, maybe they're God. No, you're not God, but God expresses himself through you. And it takes tremendous humility to get to this point where you are seeing this and getting yourself out of the way and not trying to improve your so-called human mind, which is just turns out to be a bloody waste of time in many ways. As we've talked about with Gary, he's got degrees, but what does he quote Paul as saying?
Paul had the right attitude. He says, "I count them as dung for Christ." For Christ. Because compared to the Christ, nothing compares. And in fact, too many degrees would get in the way.
He had to
finding
unlearn.
Christ.
Yeah, had to unlearn so much of what he learned, because it wasn't of God. Jeremy has no formal education, right, after high school.
That's right.
And he is our computer guru. If you look on our computer, you look on the internet and find us, you will see what he has done. And he's done it through the divine mind, by turning to God always in everything he does. And this is how we demonstrate things. It's by God speaking to us, not by has their computer on. Is that it? Also in the
We have
lesson,
people calling in from around the world and also listening on their computers.
yeah, sometimes it interferes. In Science and Health, mind alone possesses all faculties, perception, and comprehension. Therefore, mental endowments are not at the mercy of organization and decomposition. Otherwise, the very worms could unfashion man. So, again, all that we do, all that we are, it's mind, the expression of mind. And that's why we've been taught here, you start the day first thing in the morning. God is mind. God is my mind. God is the only pure and perfect mind. Ultimately, it's all there is. This other belief of many minds, or a so-called carnal mind, is belief. And that's how we overcome it. It's not understanding. It's just superimposed belief. Any other comment on that?
I just wanted to say that that's wonderful, and with the watching point, the idea of the mortal mind, which the thoughts I always got was, everything's a problem, you're worthless, stuff like that. So I'm glad to have all of that pushed away and then just get what's real and right.
What's real and right. And, the divine mind can certainly help you in your work, in your studies. It enhances everything. And Mrs. Eddy says that in Science and Health too. You become, you have greater understanding, more foresight. She talks about being able to know the past, present, and future. When you're in that mind, you know everything that you need to know. And the beautiful definition of God in the lesson, the great I am, the all-knowing, all-seeing, all-acting, all-wise, all-loving, eternal, principle, mind, soul, spirit, life, truth, love, all substance, intelligence. And that all-knowing. God is all-knowing. We, as his reflection, are also, you know all that you need to know when you need to know it. And that includes taking exams, dealing with a pharisaical thought that might be trying to trip you up. Whatever the moment calls for it, when you're in that one mind, you'll have the answer for it. Business problems with your children, because God is all-knowing. And we can reflect that ability.
And Jesus warned his disciples about this very thing. He said, I send you forth as sheep among wolves. And he warned them. He said, you'll be confronted by people in authority. You'll be confronted by kings. You'll be challenged. And he said, but don't worry. When the time comes, God will tell you what to say. You don't have to prepare for it now. God will give you what you need to know when you need to know it.
I think that's also why it says we should keep asking. Just ask 1 or 2 times, and then if you don't hear it, you do what you want. We can keep asking and trust that the answer does come at the right time.
Thank you, Florence.
Yeah, that keeps your thought open to this truth. So yes, keep asking. And if you feel you don't have the answer right away, then yes, persist. It will come. Mrs. Eddy says that too. When you need it, it will be there. So don't fret ahead of time. Maybe ahead of time you won't know. You have no idea what you're going to do. When the time comes, the answer will be there. It's worked in my own experience over and over and over again. I'll start worrying, what am I going to do? Even with the writing of the lessons. How can I write something different? I don't have an idea. Well, when the time comes and I need to write the lesson, the ideas flow. And they're always fresh and different because it's inspiration. And inspiration is a influx of God's ideas flowing from him to us, his creation. Always there.
And those of you who also write lessons or prepare readings for the Wednesday services, you've experienced the same thing. When you need something, God provides it and it flows. And we can tell that some of you are doing a wonderful job preparing lessons or preparing readings for the Wednesday service. And it's very heartening to know that you are demonstrating these things.
Yeah, and this is a beautiful lesson this week that Florence wrote. So thank you, Florence. Before we go any further on this, there was one thing I wanted to mention. A few weeks ago, we had a watch on this coronavirus, and this is an assignment. You are to be working and handling this every day. It's still popping up on my phone. It's here, there, and everywhere. We know if God didn't create it, it can't be. And Joanne sent me this treatment, and maybe we'll put it on our website. It's Bicknell Young, 1916 Association Address. And he writes, life is the primary fact and death the primary error or lie about the fact. The very nature of life is opposed to death. There never can be any death in life. Neither is there any kind of life that ever produces or experiences death. The claim that living creatures can get into the body and procure death must be met. Not as germs and microbes, but as mere belief or mental suggestion. Thus you handle it when you know that life is infinite, continuous, immutable, immortal, complete, and harmonious. It never produces anything unlike itself. There is no death in life, no death from life, no death to life, no death anywhere. For life is God, and God is all. Therefore, life is all. So it's your assignment. We've done this before where there have been other, major contagious diseases and other problems in our nation or world, and we work until it's nullified. The prayers of a Christian Scientist are very different than the Christian prayers just as we read, because we know the nothingness of it. But this work must be done, or we will be held responsible and accountable for not doing it. Not be made to forget or to neglect our duty to God, our leader, and to mankind.
By our works, we will be judged.
And justified or condemned. And
So this is a great opportunity for all of us.
So we don't let it, we did it, I know, a few weeks ago. Hopefully you all have it. It was a wonderful watch. Hopefully you still have it. Is it still on the website?
No, we don't have the Unity watches on the website,
Okay.
but I can send it to them again if needed. Also, that one
Yeah.
we can put on the daily watch page for people to look
Yeah, I'll give that to you. So yes, thank you. And we'll put some others on there. So, okay. Any comments on any of this so far?
Well, I just want to say, in the 7 years I've been here, I've seen a lot of things come up, and I've seen them go right away. So I look forward to this going away too.
Yes. Because very often we hear all this stuff, and then suddenly you don't hear anything more about it. So, and that's what we work till we put the kibosh on it. Kibosh. All right, our subject this week is mind. Golden text is Psalm 94, and Jeffrey, our golden text reader.
He that teacheth man knowledge, shall not he know?
Right. And who is it that teaches us all things? God. Thank you. All right, and then in the responsive reading, I guess, certainly our first commandment, which we've discussed many times, having no other God before that one God. And if we acknowledge any other power, including a virus or a germ that is out of God's control, well, we are disobeying that first commandment. So we always bring it back to that. Have no other gods before that one God. No other power before that one power. And it's only when we acknowledge other powers we get into trouble. There's no such thing. And then what Joanne wrote about, he layeth up sound wisdom for the righteous. He is a buckler to all them that walk uprightly. This is on the forum on our church website. And she looked up that word buckler. And I know I was shocked when I first looked that word up, because it says it's a total shield. It's like 4 feet long, or, as big as some of us, maybe even big as Lily. Maybe even 5 feet. But anyway,
I'll take two.
I'll take two. Well, it's a big protection, and so that's what we have. But she emphasizes that he that layeth up sound wisdom for the righteous, and he is a buckler to them that walk uprightly. And the point being to walk uprightly if you want that protection that God gives to everyone, everywhere. But you have to claim it and walk uprightly. And then we'll go into the story. Jeremy, you want to speak to the story, what it's about? I don't know.
Well, David and his men, they got taken, all the wives and their stuff was taken away, and they were getting ready to stone David. Not a good time, not a good moment for him. But he encouraged himself in the Lord, and God said, go get it back. You'll get everything back. So, wonderful.
And what did you write about that?
Well, it reminded me of, we recently had in Nehemiah that he consulted himself, and then he rebuked the rulers of the city. And I was just thinking of how it's important to not overlook that when an opportunity presents itself, there's no need to pull for consensus or to Google the problem. Definitely no need to descend into self-pity or worry. We simply need to go to God and He will direct us. And the comfort, encouragement, and counsel we need is always an inspired moment alone with God away. So I'm just really grateful for that. Because before, my imagination would have run wild. The options, I can think of so many things that could happen, and every one of them was fake. So
I remember the first time I ever read about this story, and I had I'd been in science a good part of my life, and it was a article in an old journal, and I thought, wow, this is an amazing story. It has so many lessons. I mean, here, like the worst thing happened to David. Comes back, everything's gone. They've burned stuff. They've taken his wife, and we read all about Abigail, and she was one that they took, one of his beloved wives. And then his men are furious with him. They want to stone him. And you can put yourself in those shoes, like, whoa, what am I going to do now? But yes, he encouraged himself. He calmed himself down. That's what we all must do, whatever the circumstances. Calm yourself and encourage, that word, to inspire with courage, spirits, strength, embolden. So he knew, he shut out all those other voices that he was going to be stoned and this was the worst thing that ever could happen. Oh my God, this is just terrible. You can imagine. And he got in that secret place of the Most High and communed with God. And what did God tell him to do?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead. Pursue. He pursued the enemy. Go ahead.
I like what Parthen said about it too, that the other men gave liberty to their passions, but he set his graces to work. And it just reminded me of Mrs. Eddy saying that she made strong demands on love.
Yes. Yeah. I was going to have Gary read what Parthen said. Parthen's wrote from Matthew Henry's. Gary read that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, from Matthew Henry's concise commentary. When we go abroad in the way of our duty, we may comfortably hope that God will take care of our families in our absence, but not otherwise. If when we come off a journey, we find our abode in peace and not laid waste, as David here found his, let the Lord be praised for it. David's men murmured against him. Great faith must expect such severe trials. But observe that David was brought thus low only just before he was raised to the throne. When things are at their worst within the church and people of God, then they begin to mend. David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. His men fretted at their loss. The soul of the people was bitter. Their own discontent and impatience added to the affliction and misery. But David bore it better, though he had more reason than any of them to lament it. They gave liberty to their passions, but he set his graces to work. And while they dispirited each other, he, by encouraging himself in God, kept his spirit calm. Those who have taken the Lord for their God may take encouragement from him in the worst times.
So that is so beautiful. And this story is just one that's so beautiful. I mean, I don't know why I never read it in a lesson before. Now we do have them in our lessons because it's such a beautiful story. So he pursued the enemy. And, the enemy can be all kinds of things, but certainly it can be the mental barrage you can get. So you don't just take it, you pursue it, you go after it. You don't just let it talk. You go after it and then destroy it. In whatever way, you destroy it with the truth. As we talked about a few weeks ago, it is written. You have your arsenal of the truth to destroy that mental barrage of an enemy. Or it can come as other forms, as it did with David. But he asked God what to do. He got his wisdom from on high, and then he pursued, and he restored, he recovered. And I want to read a few things from Kimball that I've always found helpful. I can find them.
Well, and notice this is all divine principle at work, isn't it? Because they recovered what was rightfully theirs.
Yes.
Yes, certainly. I mean,
And they didn't
what
recover
God
what was theirs.
That's it. It
But
was theirs.
That's divine principle at work.
It was a law at work. Kimball, on his teaching and addresses, Mental Protection of Home, there is but one household, that is God's household. There is no avenue or channel by which error can possibly enter this household to create a sense of discord, fear, derision, anger, doubt, subtlety, lack, or straitened circumstances. Nothing can enter this household or consciousness to annoy or destroy, for all here is life, and God good fills it. It's on page 122. Now, we've been taught here, anytime you leave your home or think about your home, that's how you think about it. That God good, God being all in all, fills your home. And if you leave the home, you say a prayer. You thank God for it. No, God protects it. This is being proactive in the truth. You also know no one could ever want anything that you have, because God gives to all his children, all good. And this is praying unceasingly. And this, my friends, will do much more for you than all these electronic
secure systems and stuff like that.
This is divine protection. And Mrs. Eddy says that that security, the security for the claims of being, comes only in divine science. It's only in science that we get our security. And then this is so beautiful that Kimball says in his lectures and articles. Remember this, always remember this. There is no law against you. If you mourn, if you have been cast down because of disease, know this. There positively is no law against you. And moreover, know this still further, that you are entitled to enforce the law of your own life. You are entitled to enforce the law of your own health, of your own prosperity. You can do it. You can learn to do it. It is within the confines, within the divine provision concerning your very life and your daily needs. Be not afraid. You may be a law unto yourself, a law to your recovery from disease, a law to your business, a law of harmony to your welfare and your own household, and all things of your life, because God gave man dominion, and you are entitled to it. In this very hour, you are entitled to be a law of recovery to your own self. That's what this story is about. So ask yourself, do you think you've lost something? Something you thought was valuable in any way? You are a law of recovery to your own self, if you know it. It's a law of God, just as David proved this law. We can prove it. I know I have proved it over the years. I've lived long enough to think, oh, I lost this, or isn't this so sad? And everything has come back that I've needed, truly, and more so. But of course, you have to be willing to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. You've got to live this truth. You can't just do whatever you darn well feel like and expect these laws to work for you. There's an please. Go ahead, Florence.
Yeah, I think that in that encouraging moment for David, he also remembered what God has done. God has helped him so many times. He was grateful, I'm sure. And that brings, the thought of certainty that there is a God that can help. I think sometimes we forget to look at all the good that has happened. And that gives that doubtful mind, which the lesson says, neither be ye of doubtful mind.
Yes.
Thank you, Florence. That's right. He had been through a lot before this. I mean, he had already defeated David, the Goliath, or I mean, sorry, the Goliath, the Philistine. He had already been saved from several attempts by Saul to kill him, and he had behaved himself wisely. So he'd already proven many, many, many times that God was right there taking care of him. And he was very grateful for it. And he saw his life as a divine mission, as we all should. God has given us all something to do. And God protects us and provides for us in doing what he has for us to do. So this is just one more experience in David's life prior to his becoming king that showed God's care.
Thank you.
And yes, I just I've spoken to people that I know personally, and I've said this, and I'll say it again right now, is that don't wait until the crisis comes to realize that you need God. As you mentioned, Mary, about building up your your storehouse, your spiritual resources, so that when something like that happens, some event happens in one's life, you can draw on that, on those resources, versus not having any idea about what God is or caring about it until something happens, and then not having it when you need it.
Thank you.
That's something that I share with those that I care about, and I share it now just because I've had that situation, and I'm sure everyone will at some point have some sort of crisis that you have to draw on something greater than yourself.
Yeah, and that's why there's always a drifting away before something happens. It might seem to come out of the blue, but usually you've let down in some way. So that's why it's important, especially when things are going well, because that's Mrs. Eddy warns us, tear or triumph harms, that you keep working. That's why we keep these roundtables and Bible studies and all that we do week after week, to keep us alert and working and not drifting off into the materialism of the day. And then you seem to get attacked in some way, and you're unprepared for it. So we have a sword in one hand, a tool in the other, as we've learned from Nehemiah.
This is also why Mrs. Eddy insisted that Christian Scientists watch every day. Do a watch. Keep your thought alert to the danger, because the danger is there. If you're not alert to it, well, you're being handled by it. And that is one of the problems with the organization in Boston. They stopped watching after a while.
And they weren't given the books that explains the importance of it. So we thank God for all of this, and we thank God for our watchers and watching, because it's very, very important. So it's such a wonderful story. Remember, you are a law of recovery to yourself. And
so be a terror to error.
Yeah, be a terror to error. Don't let it walk all over you, and don't ignore it. Don't pretend it doesn't exist. You meet it head on. Just as David ran to Goliath, he didn't ignore it. He ran toward it. You don't heal a problem by ignoring it or pretending it doesn't exist. Handling it is very different than that. Handling it, Mrs. Eddy says, I acknowledge your claims, but I denounce your power. And David handled it. He didn't run from it. We must never run from it. If you run from it, it will continue to chase you.
It will pursue you.
It will pursue you. Yes. Anybody else on that? So this week in the paper, I read this wonderful story. I was praying about when to tell about it, but I think I will tell about it today because it sort of follows. what goes on here. It is, it's about a man called Ron Archer. He wrote a book called The Power of Belief. Now, because we've talked about at times, feeling we're victims. In Christian Science, we understand we are never victims. We are victors. And if you accept the belief that you are a victim and your outward circumstances is what rules your life, you will always be a victim. Until you discover that God never said that. And with God, all things are possible. All right, so this fellow, it's the most sad story in the beginning anyway. It says, in his early years, Archer was as unwanted as anyone could ever be. He describes how he was a trick baby born to a poor teen mother who was forced by her pimp to attempt to abort him. Nobody wants the baby, no hope, no future, kill it was the word, Archer said. So various abortion attempts were unsuccessful, and Archer bore physical consequences. Born 2 months premature, he was beset with multiple issues, including having no pancreas and an underdeveloped bladder. His childhood was rough. Stepfather was physically abusive. It goes on, I won't go into it. But he was overweight, and he stuttered, and he was mercilessly bullied. It's just, anyway. But in his school, a teacher was there. Her name was Mrs. Spears, and she got wind of his stuttering issue. So she began to give him lessons to help him. And, but along with that, she did something else. He writes, she assured him, or it says here, she assured him that he would be great and that he had a destiny to fulfill. And she opened up a world of faith to him that until then was foreign. His world had been ruled by ghetto economics, simple as that. There was no place for faith or church. He says, we didn't like church. When your family's involved in questionable activities, the last thing we want you to do is be involved with confessing, and people might go to jail. My family didn't trust anybody but themselves. Mrs. Spears told him stories from the Bible. He came to see the imperfect, broken people were called on to do great things, men like Paul and Abraham. He recognized some of their dubious behavior straight from his neighborhood. She also showed him a verse from Jeremiah 1:4-5 that upended his inner world. Archer said, in essence, that one scripture says, Ronaldo, it doesn't matter who your parents are. It doesn't matter how you were conceived. It doesn't matter how you were born. God says, I'm your parent, your father, and I planted you in that particular situation for a divine assignment. And then he goes on, the promises of God. It was my oxygen. It was my air. It was my hope. It was my light. It was my truth. It was my father. It was my mother. It's all I had to build me up. The belief that he was meant for a special purpose was a powerful anchor. It changed everything, he said. It gave me a belief in something greater than me, greater than my current situation. Archer believed it so much that it turned his life around. Through practice, his stutter disappeared. He began to excel academically in high school, and he became the first Black student body president at a predominantly white, wealthy Catholic school. And then there was Mrs. Spears. So he went on. It goes on. He became a pastor. He began to help other people with what he learned. And he set up a organization to help other people. And he said he had a special place called the Mrs. Spears Center. And it was the training room where her example serves as a model. She saw him become a pastor and grow up to be successful. She would say to him, I told you God don't make no junk.
Right.
We have to have for our calendar. There's a line of hers that he uses all the time, and this is a quote, and this is so beautiful. God uses greatly those who have been wounded very deeply. So,
Mrs. Spears.
Mrs. Spears, you have one person who reaches out and gives you the truth, the hope of God.
Mm-hmm.
One Bible verse. Florence?
Yeah.
Are you saying something?
No, I didn't say.
That one Bible verse that changed changed him entirely. To know that it's God. God is his mother, father, and that God put him here for a purpose. And this is the most important thing we can tell anybody, teach anybody. Certainly teach our children, but teach anybody. And these are the laws and the rules of the universe. We learn them in Christian Science. They're true everywhere. And they heal. And so here, he could have just thought he was a victim. He could have rejected the things Mrs. Spears said to him, but he didn't. And he hungered after it, like we read in the Bible. It was the most important thing there was. He hungered after this truth. And that truth came into him and healed him entirely. He touched me and made me whole. That's what this truth can do.
And he calls it belief. He believed something that he knew in his heart was true. And that is what Jesus meant when he said, if ye believe on me, these works that I do, ye shall do also. Because that use of the word belief is really understanding. It's the rock solid conviction that something is true.
You can look up that word believe, believing in the glossary. Mrs. Eddy speaks to it. I mean, there's that one believing where it's not with substance, but then there's this other, which he's talking about is the real belief in something. So he had that, he wrote a book, and he's continuing to help and bless others. And he said the first time he told his story to someone, he was very reluctant. He didn't want it. And that's a terrible story to tell. But it reached that other person's heart because the other person was struggling. That's why we must never hold back our testimonies. And I'm grateful here that we have the humility that people can give testimonies about what they've been through, their suffering, what they've had to go through. And there's no pride about it. In order to help. Heart speaks to heart. It's not up there saying, well, I did this and I proved this and you were stupid and I did it, which sometimes can happen if you're not careful. You let pride come in and you get all blown up about what happened and not realize that it was God working, only God, and you were just his humble servant. So anyway, he reached out to one person, realized the huge effect that had, and then he was able to help many others. And always giving Mrs. Spears the credit. He never forgot Mrs. Spears because he was humble about it.
She was the angel that God sent
to him. So remember, and if you can be that angel to somebody, and in our prayers, this is why, again, we watch and pray, because this sets into motion. If there's someone receptive, well, God will send an angel to that person to heal and bless that person. You know this. It's bringing all his sheep into the fold, and the lost sheep of Israel, as our watch sang last night, God bringing those lost sheep to this truth. And that verse in Nehemiah, which I was interested in. No, was it Nehemiah or Jeremiah? Jeremiah, sorry. Jeremiah. It was Then the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Before I formed thee in the belly I knew thee, and before thou camest forth out of the womb I sanctified thee, and ordained thee a prophet unto the nations. That's what changed his life. And he rewrote the words to how it meant to him, that God knew him, even when they were trying to abort him. And he was born for a mighty purpose, and that God was his father and mother. And that word sanctify means to purify, to prepare for a divine service, sanctification. So this is how this truth works. And it never fails to work because it's the truth. Okay.
And we should never, ever resist God's sanctifying us. Because sometimes it's a painful experience. Sometimes it doesn't feel so good. But if it's purification, let it happen, because only good can come from it. As someone once said, if your pride gets hurt, that's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, and if your feelings get hurt, that's Victor Young. He says, if your feelings get hurt, get rid of your feelings.
Right. Don't get rid of the messenger. Get rid of the feelings.
Yeah, because sometimes someone has to tell you things maybe you don't want to hear, but you have to be willing and willing to change and have the humility. And as Mrs. Eddy says, if there's any truth to it, great, I'll take it, I'll learn, I'll change. And if there's not anything truth to it, then it's a water off a duck's back. That's not taking it personally. That's learning. And
if there's a lesson to be learned.
So let's see. Anybody else? Any questions? Or we actually have a group online on the teleconference line, but then we have about usually 100 or more people listening to these things, but they're silent because they're not on.
They're not on the telephone.
Yeah, they're on the telephone, and we're
computer.
Yeah, we're grateful for those of you who join us live. We're brave enough. All right. Well, your takeaway from today is then to remember about God's law of recovery and know that it's working in your life. Kimball speaks about people who, he says, why is it that some businessmen never fail? And if they fail, they always come out on top, because they become a law to the belief of their own success, because they put into the scale of being that which is efficacious. So why is it? Why is it that some people rise up and some don't? Why is it that Ron Archer rose up? He let God work in his life. And so it will always be. And that's why if you're complaining and whining about your lot in life, hush. Count your blessings and know that the laws that are in these situations, whether it was David in the law of recovery or this Ron Archer, whatever it is, God can raise you up out of it if you turn to him in all humility and obedience. So we'll end today. Jo, again, she found something good this is from Precepts by Gilbert Carpenter. And Gary can read it. Thank you.
Okay. When one takes on divine mind, he can do the impossible. That is, the impossible from the human mind standpoint. Thus, one can test himself to determine whether he is functioning with the human mind or divine mind. If he is using the human mind, he cannot do these things. If he is reflecting divine mind, he can. And thereby he knows that he is taking on divine mind. But he must keep in mind that he is not taking on divine mind to make demonstrations. He is making demonstrations to prove that he is taking on the divine mind. That is the great work that confronts a student, to establish the permanent recognition that he is functioning under the one mind, the only mind, That is the mind of God. And that no matter what he is doing, he must know that God is supreme in him. He must keep that thought alive and active. If it begins to sag and a material line of thinking comes in, he must resurrect his thought and get it back on the right platform, because that and that alone entitles him to be called a son of God. No matter what one is doing, it becomes a source of good to him if he watches his thought to be sure that he is carrying the recognition of divine mind as supreme in him. At first, a student must go into the closet mentally and shut the door, have all conditions favorable, in order to demonstrate divine mind. Then comes the need of trying it out under all sorts of conditions, both favorable and unfavorable, agreeable to the senses and disagreeable, in order to determine whether he can maintain his consciousness of divine mind under all circumstances. He must prove that when he seems to lose it, he can get it back under affliction as well as under harmony. Thus, all things work together for good to them that love God. Romans 8:28. Those who love God are those who are striving to establish God as supreme in them. So all things that they do that offer the opportunity to train them in maintaining the consciousness of God as supreme bring and become a blessing.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.